Good evening and welcome back. My name is Tabitha.
Hello, good evening. My name is Chindi.
And welcome to the Radius. And so we are coming right back at you with a topic that's kind of hotly contested around the internet right now. And why we're even discussing it is because one of our earliest episodes was about international, specifically European elections, and how contrasting them with our U.S. elections, and how basically in two elections are showing that there's more of a progressive leading edge as opposed to more of a, what's the word I would consider a conservative undertone, i.e. in France, Le Pen did not win. Emmanuel Macron won. So we discussed that and what the implications it had. That's a past episode, and anywho, you could check it out earlier. However, today at the G20 summit, which is a very high-profile event every year containing the 20 major economies around the world, they meet and discuss policies and sort of kind of bring attention to these major issues in our society. Mm-hmm. So it's basically a time that the issues of poverty, of underdevelopment, things of that nature come to the forefront, and our world leaders can sort of talk about them. So something that I stumbled across were the remarks made at a press conference when a gentleman from the Ivory Coast asked the French president, really, what was his opinion on a Marshall Plan for the continent of Africa. And his response in the headlines was that, two headlines. The first headline I saw said that in response to basically development issues on the continent of Africa, some of the issues are women having 7 to 8 children. And the other remark was civilizational, which implies a lot of different things if you read that out of context. So naturally people got offended, and of course on Twitter he's getting roasted right now. But we're going to basically dissect that about what kind of remark is that, number one, and number two, where was he coming from? What's the mentality that really brought that remark to the forefront? Mm-hmm. Really, for the continent of Africa, not a country, FYI, there's a lot of stereotyping that occurs. Basically, these prevailing sort of stereotypes, prevailing myths, that it's, and this is by no means meant to offend, but the myths are somehow that it's backwards. The myths are somehow that it's impoverished. And these are the dialogue, and this is the level the dialogue happens. And it's never anything different. It's never anything different in the news or the media. And it's unfortunate. So when a world leader, we anticipate they'll be a little enlightened, and we anticipate they'll be a little sensitive. And so when we hear them say such a dismissive kind of remark, it can be insulting, it can be hurtful, and so naturally the world reacted. And I think in the future many will be more careful in the responses about Africa, because I think they need serious attention, serious dialogue, not these sort of stereotypes that are antiquated.
Yes, and yes, I mean, I was kind of very shocked. My understanding of French is pretty good, although my conversational skills are, I would say, average. But to listen to such a speech, I was like, is this him speaking? I was thinking it was Le Pen, It took me a while to realize it was him speaking, actually. And so I was very shocked. But in a way, I wasn't surprised after I thought about it, because there are different mentalities that exist. In France, there's a different mentality from the mentality that exists in some other countries, and this is very important to discuss as we discuss this topic, because I think that's what was going on in his mind. I mean, the answer he gave was, he didn't even need to explain all that, to be frank. He could have just said it's very complicated, we'll have to look into it, and that would have been fine. He went into the 7 to 8 children, and I happen to have grown up part of my life in Africa, and when I was a child. And I know a lot about it. I have relatives in Africa, I have cousins, and brothers, sisters. And to say that, 7 to 8 children, no, that's not true. That's absolutely false. It depends on which part of Africa you're talking about and where you're located at. And so, I mean, that's one of the statements I would have to say that was absolutely false. I have to say that. The people in Africa do not have 7 to 8 children all over the continent. It's not true, maybe in some very few parts, and that can be disputed. In fact, in Zambia, it's just as high as the United States.
What I think I'll try to find is maybe a link that kind of refutes all of these stereotypes about Africa, so our viewers can appreciate that there are cities that look like Las Vegas, there are cities that look like New York City, there are cities that look like any major world
Absolutely.
city on the continent. Additionally, a highly educated population, consists there. Women tend to, pursue education and things of that nature. And I think basically resorting to these sort of demeaning stereotypes is another way to sort of reverse. It's like a role reversal, like, oh, well, it's your fault. It's kind of, it's sort of like not taking ownership of anything. And secondly, not really offering any real assistance. If you tell people not to have 7 or 8 children, well, if your society supports that and that's your culture, how can you tell me that? So you said you weren't surprised, and you said it's a mentality thing. What's the mentality? What's the dichotomy? Because clearly I have another one. We're Western, for lack of a better term, and we have this sort of perspective that respect people in their beliefs, respect people in their attitudes, respect people in how they want to live their lives. So what's the dichotomy here? What's the other perspective that they have?
It might be in France in general, and not every French person is like that. We have to make this very clear. But in general, when you go to France, it's this idea that, you become part of the French culture. And so this is basically an assimilative sort of culture. So if you are French, you behave like a French person, and if you are, you have to be completely French. Multiculturalism, which is sort of Anglo-American idea mostly, is the idea that if you bring your culture, you remain that culture, and you keep it that way. And so you can come to America and still remain. For example, I'm originally from Zambia, so I can come to America and still have the Zambian culture, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, I've had cases where friends have asked me to cook for them or things like that. So those are things that happen. There's a difference that I see personally.
So the remarks are sort of rooted in this perspective that the people of the continent of Africa need to sort of adopt another sort of approach to life. And for lack of a better term, they already do. Like, again, we discussed they're modern.
Mm-hmm.
We've discussed they're developed.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the perception is somehow, well, you're not assimilating.
Yes, the idea is, if only they could become French, or if only it could become Western, completely Western, then everything will be okay. There are some people who even go as far as saying, don't even speak your local languages, just speak French. I mean, I'm not kidding, because I've heard of people come from even Africa who don't speak the local languages because they don't want to speak the local languages. They speak only French, and that's it, or they speak only English, but mostly French in this situation.
You mean Francophone countries?
Yes, Francophone countries, and they speak French better than the person from France. I mean, it's accent-wise, you wouldn't be able to tell easily, and I'm not going against that, but I'm just trying to say that that's the idea, is that if you became French, then everything will be okay. Then you develop, and that's just, I'm sorry, but that's kind of an ignorant. There are a lot of other factors. It's going to be very complicated, to be frank.
Well, of course, at the Radius, we like to be solution-oriented, so my only take on this would be take it as a lesson. When you are going to be in any situation, maybe you work for an agency that you sometimes have to be public facing, perhaps you do customer service, do your research, because really what that statement reeked of was that perhaps they weren't prepared to have a real discussion on solutions, because it's a known thing that there are issues that need to be addressed. He mentioned trafficking, for example. He mentioned many other things in that statement. So have actual solutions prepared. What have you done? What have you researched? Things of that nature. But, ultimately prefacing it with there's some kind of civilizational problem, which the word civilization is rampant with a little bit of discrimination because it implies civilized, right? So that's where the ultimate undertone really went. with the whole statement, and I think it just took a bad turn because that was coupled with another statement, and so everything else got lost. Because when I read the whole transcript, it's like, okay, you talked about other issues, and I'm not holding anyone to any standard that myself or I imagine you either wouldn't hold yourself, which is that you're human and that you may make mistakes. And maybe he did not even mean that. It's sort of like a Freudian thing where you mean to say something else and something else came out. So we'll give you, grace, but
I'm hoping he didn't mean that, frankly speaking, because I'm a big fan of him. I even put likes.
Well, we were hopeful. Let's put it that way. We were very hopeful that
it's one of those things that happen, and I hope maybe he learns from that mistake, given the roasting that he's getting from Twitter and so on, and maybe you have a proper response to the problems of Africa. Maybe this wouldn't force France to resolve some of the issues in Africa. France is not this isolated country that is not intervening in Africa. They still intervene. They still send troops there, and people from Francophone countries know this very well. They intervene in governmental issues and so on and so forth. And even sometimes they participate in coup d'etats, and they have sometimes questionable foreign policy issues that they have to deal with. So I think Macron should address that instead of talking about
7 or 8 children.
And
aside from that, there's the colonial legacy discussion, right? So, and all post-colonial countries have this problem. If we're so bad now, what was going on back then? Like, really, when it was profitable to have colonies and things of that nature, you didn't seem to mind. So now that it's like this post-colonial structure, it's all of a sudden, it's like, and I'm not implying that anyone from Africa is a victim, but for lack of a better term, it's like blaming the victim, so to speak. Well, you guys have 7 or 8 kids, and you guys have civilizational issues. Well, we also have immense, there's debt. Foreign debt issues. There's, again, legacies of colonialism and things of that nature, being underdeveloped, and of course the inability to have real competition on a worldwide scale. I think that's the conversation people want to hear, and I'm pretty sure that's the conversation that Africa deserves. And again, I think it's also another solution-oriented thing is to ask Africans what they think. Instead of like talking down, have conversations with the people on the continent about the direction that they want to go and give them a seat at the table. We want to hear their voice.
Yes, and I think it's important to listen more than speak and tell people what to do. And,
solutions.
It's a solution-oriented system. And so let's see what happens. Maybe he'll correct this mistake. And now, we're coming to a close of this topic. Well, this is a general idea. Read about it, research it, and read more about it. But, we'll be discussing different points of view.
Yeah.
You see, I'm a fan of Macron, but I wasn't afraid to confront an issue when I saw that there was something wrong that was said. I wasn't saying I'm going to eliminate that, because I believe that we have to find solutions to many problems in the world, and we all do make mistakes. I do too, and so this is something that you all should think about, and also think about it. Is it better to have a society that is assimilative, where you have to assimilate into a culture, or is it better to have a multicultural society? Think about it. I don't know the answers to that. It's a different topic.
Well, it's definitely not a pro-con thing. Just to leave everyone with that, I think that's the major point we want to convey at the Radius, is that we want you to sort of enrich yourself with the information that's available and make your own decisions, and that's basically empowerment. It goes back to empowerment. So we begin with the enlightenment, then you do the engagement, then you do the enrichment, and then you are empowered, and that's our goal. Definitely.
So, we'll close with think about it, but thank you for watching us, and I do appreciate it. And Tabitha, you have anything more to say about this?
No, just that we want to hear from you and what your thoughts are, and we appreciate you as always.
All right. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.